So my name's Craig Ogilvie. I'm very excited that we have this session today about um, uh, increasing the diversity of our graduate programs. I'm Assistant Dean in the Graduate College. I'm also a professor in the Physics and Astronomy Department. Uh, I have completely delegated the responsibility for this afternoon's session to the people who are doing the work. My task is to set the goals. I also have some data that I made available to Megan and others, so it should be in your folders. So if during the session data questions come up, I can answer those. But I think it's much more effective and efficient use of your time if you learn from the programs that are doing the recruiting and the hard work to try to increase the diversity of their graduate programs. So in those conversations, I set out 3 goals for today, and they're listed in front of you. The first goal is to give you some ideas about what you might be able to do in your programs. So that's the sort of the ideas that you can take, either adapt or change as it makes most sense for your own area of work. The second and third bullets are sort of paired. I think you'll get an impression today that some of our programs that have been, by their fact they've been selected, they're doing some really fascinating work, and it's been a collective work by several faculty and staff in those programs. So I want to convey simultaneously 2 messages. One is that, a collective effort is really, I think, a key component of success. But that collective effort is the third goal, has to start somewhere, right? So by all means, some of these initiatives can start small and then grow up to the collective effort that you'll see in front of you today. So I want to simultaneously inspire you that collective efforts are important, but also not scare you away that you don't think you can start by doing something small to start with. So with that, let me tell you the order. We split this roughly into 2 halves. The first half, we're going to have 2 programs, genetics and mathematics. They're going to talk about what they have done to recruit and retain diverse graduate students. And then we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of our new initiatives, which are graduate learning communities. And I have 2 representative programs, one in biochemistry, biophysics, and one in the School of Education. But first up, we have genetics. I think Jeff Esner is going to start and then introduce the panel. Do you want to have this one since it works?
Yeah, I'm just going to introduce the panel today. I don't know if this is working.
That one definitely works.
Okay, thank you, Craig. And as Doge of the Interdepartmental Genetics and Genomics Program, we've been very active in this area, and I'm not going to take any credit for that. All I want to say is that I'm here to carry the torch today and turn the microphone over to some of the people that really have done the work here. First, I want to introduce Linda Wild. She's our administrator for the program. She's been extremely active in recruiting minorities, and she'll tell you about some of her efforts. Drina Dobbs, a faculty member in genetics, development and cell biology, and she's been very active in doing some of these as well, and Gustavo McIntosh from biochemistry. So with that, I'll let you start, Gustavo, if you want to.
I thought Linda was going to start. Let's start with Linda. Is that okay?
Hi, I think the first thing we'll explain is what an interdepartmental graduate program is. We're actually interdepartmental genetics and genomics at this point. You'll notice that Gustavo's from biochemistry, Drina's from genetics, development, cell biology. Interdepartmental program in our case is like 14 different departments on campus. Faculty participate, and we have 4 different colleges involved. So we have a wide range of individuals to call on and to work with. The 3 points I want to make today is one of the things we're doing is we're recruiting graduate students directly out of the REUs. We figure that 6 weeks or 8 weeks of REU training gives us a really good idea of what that student is capable of. So we're actually making them offers of admission directly out of the REU. And they have to fill out all the application materials, but once they've done that, they're in, and we offer them a rotation assistantship.
So how many students have we recruited?
We average about one a year through that program. Some of them are just standard domestic, and some are underrepresented students. The second thing that we, I guess, wanted to talk about a little bit was retention. When we do bring graduate students to Iowa State, we always assign them a temporary, if they're participating in rotations, we assign them a temporary advisor, and all of our new graduate students have graduate student mentors. We encourage the students to work together in their classes, to form subgroups, and to work their way through the coursework together. We try to meet with them twice during the fall semester and at least once during the spring semester to help them get off to a good start. We meet with them as a group. The third thing that we're just, I'm not completely sure or very comfortable with this approach, but we've tried it a couple of times, and so far we've been okay with it. We're aware of underrepresented students coming in through and applying to other graduate majors, and in a couple of cases we realized that their applications look good enough and have enough sufficient background that they would be a good student to consider for our graduate program. So we've tried to work with some of the other interdepartmentals who are looking at these students, and if they've decided that they're not going to make an offer, we've taken a look at a couple of these students and given them offers. And so far we've done this with 2 students, and they've been successful. So it's not the standard way of recruiting an underrepresented student, and we've had prior contact with them in some respects. It's not like we just cold call them, but we've interacted with them in such a way that we felt comfortable enough to approach them and to say, this is our grad program, these are our courses, this is our faculty. If you want to come, we'll make you an offer. And once they get here, we've told them that they can rotate with faculty in the original major that they have applied for, as well as faculty within our own program. And we've done that with 2 students, and both have been successful.
Questions or comments for Linda? Okay. Oh, at the end. Okay. I'm Drina Dobbs, and I would first like to thank Linda Wild for all she's done for not only recruiting and retaining minority students, but recruiting lots of really excellent graduate students to our interdepartmental graduate programs. So I would like to build a little bit on what she said. One successful NSF IGERT training grant in computational molecular biology that we obtained, again, largely through cooperation with Linda, but Dan Voitas, who's no longer at this university, was the first PI on the first IGERT. And then I was PI on a second NSF IGERT training grant in computational molecular biology. And in working with Linda and the IGG program, and also with the BCB bioinformatics and computational biology programs on campus, there was a strategy that worked very well in the first IGERT for recruiting minority and underrepresented students, and a strategy that did not work very well in the second IGERT. So in the first IGERT, we really made concerted, directed efforts to recruit women and minorities into our program. We contacted everybody on campus who worked with minority students and women in engineering and all those things. And we were able, and as NSF allowed us to provide 3 years of full RA support to specific minority and female students. That was really successful. In the second IGERT, we partnered with New Mexico State University, which is a high minority enrolling institution. Turns out a lot of people partner with New Mexico State University. And one of the reasons I believe that that effort was not as successful in developing a pipeline for Native American Indian students and so forth to come from New Mexico State into Iowa State is that New Mexico State had lots of partners, and they just were not as engaged as Iowa State was in trying to make a success of the effort. So they had about half of the funds. They certainly trained a few master's students, but the pipeline that we had hoped to develop didn't develop. So I can say that was a strategy that, although NSF viewed it very favorably, I think was not as successful as the first approach of providing additional support for students and making a lot of one-on-one contacts. I want to raise this question in a general audience. Is there a better way? NSF and Iowa State both emphasize going to historically black institutions or minority, predominantly minority institutions to recruit students to Iowa State. In my view, a better strategy might be to go to states or universities where minorities are minorities. For example, University of Georgia, University of Alabama, those kinds of schools that have a minority population that are used to being the minority and don't have such a dramatic cultural shock when they arrive at Iowa State. Just a suggestion, and I have no idea whether anybody's trying to do that sort of thing. Finally, I have a request. I'd like to again thank the organizers for what I think is a really valuable workshop for sharing ideas so that faculty and programs know about the resources available at Iowa State. Better communication, I think, is really key because a lot of faculty really don't know where to go to get ideas for their broader impacts, and we certainly don't know where to get the data, in particular, the data supporting certain strategies as successful strategies for recruiting and maintaining a more diverse set of graduate students. And with that, I would like to reemphasize what Linda said about increasing communication between the REUs on campus and the graduate programs. We could really do a better job, I think, of recruiting students, undergraduate students who participate in these summer REU programs. One summer we had an ice cream social where we actually invited all of the REUs to meet with many of the graduate programs, and that seemed to have been successful. And secondly, the idea that we should, as a university, share information about our minority applicants. And when an applicant comes to one particular program and doesn't find a good match, or there's not sufficient funding, if it's legal to do so, I think we should share information, because getting that minority student to this campus is the biggest challenge. Once they're on this campus, and especially if they're interested in coming here, we need to make every effort to admit them. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Gustavo, who's going to talk about a really important program here.
Thank you. I guess I'll build on what Drina said a little bit. And I'm going to focus only on my effort on recruiting students going to minority-focused national meetings. In particular, the one that I'm most involved with is going to SACNAS, which is the Society for the Advancement of Native Americans, Chicanos, and Latinos, I think, in science. And the biggest problem that I had when I started going to these meetings was to recruit minority students to a non-minority or non-diverse state. Right? The idea that they have is Iowa is white, and that's it. And they don't want to come to a place where they feel that they're not going to have a community. And so the first things we had to do was to build an image. We needed to be there all the time. They needed to know us. So the first year, they didn't know where Iowa is. The second year, they knew me, and the students that I had seen the year before will recognize me and come talk to me again. And we built sort of a presence. Linda helped us a ton on actually getting the right position for our booth, the size that was big enough so we could be seen all the time, and getting from the little things, you know, like a tablecloth that is flashy and they can see us. So we are different from other programs, and we can be seen all the time. And so building the image was important to start with. But then we needed to also build a community here to show that we can have a support community for them. So we also work on creating a SACNAS chapter on campus. And bringing students with me was also a key part of being successful at recruiting students. I can say a lot of things to the students, and they identified with me because I'm also a minority, but that's not enough. They want to talk to students to know what their experience is when they are here, because my experience is completely different. And so having undergraduate and graduate students to talk to was really a key thing to also share the experience that they can have at Iowa State. So those were the first things we did. But then the other thing is I was very impressed with SACNAS because they have a very important focus on career development. So they offer a lot of other activities other than the career fair or the recruitment fair. And so we also got involved in this. So I participate in judging posters, and that gives me another opportunity to identify students that are going to be good targets to then recruit. I don't recruit at the posters, but I tell them to go see me later. But also, they have other things, like, for example, talking to scientists. So that is an excellent opportunity to know what they want to know first. And it's very interesting that you said that New Mexico State wasn't as engaged to send students to Iowa, because I've been involved with New Mexico people a lot now through SACNAS. And they are a hot commodity. It's true. They expect now a lot from anybody that wants to engage them, because they basically are a hot commodity. And they are there getting offers continuously. So basically, it's like a betting process now. You have to outbid the next person that is coming to bring those students. So rather than going that way, I think that the best way is to engage first a specific faculty that will be in contact with us. And that's what I'm trying to do now in my interaction with the SACNAS people, is to not only recruit students, but recruit faculty, or recruit the people in those places that are involved in outreach. And so that way we can have the pipeline built, not through just contact with the students, but through contact with persons that are going to be more committed to bringing faculty, to bringing students here. And I think that this is going to be through our personal connections with PIs rather than, or administrators rather than the students alone. And there are a lot of possibilities in those national meetings to interact with students that I think that has to go beyond just what's going on at the booth. We can have very good salesmen at the booth, but if what we are selling is not compelling enough, it's not going to be enough. So I think we need to bring the students through other ways. And all the other career development opportunities, if we build a presence there, then they are going to know about Iowa State, and they're going to come here. And it's a slow process. The first year I went, I talked to a lot of students, and we have very few applicants. Every year since then, we have been getting more applicants. It's still slow, but we're getting more and more applicants. And the last couple of years, we've been successful at actually recruiting students and get the students coming to Iowa State. So it's ramping up, but I think it's a slow process. It's not going to be from 1 year, just show up and then bring 20 students to Iowa State. That's it. Yeah.
Questions for genetics?
I don't have all the numbers, but I talk about, we ask the students for their contact information, and I say I bring around 100 students' informations here, and then Linda contacts them.
You mean for SACNAS or for the national meetings or for the program?
As an example, I mean, how much this effort, I mean, he said that he started having a little more applicants, and now you've been
Sure.
able to recruit. So the thing is, in terms of actual numbers, when did you start, and what has been kind of the progression? I mean, that's something, I mean, the thing is, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because if we have to make a pitch for this in our department, for example, we will need to tell them what type of success. Because,
Sure.
you know,
We started in 2008, and I think we've gone every year since. We've sent anywhere from 2 to 5 people to SACNAS to represent. We didn't really track very well in the first few years as far as who actually turned around and applied. But we also represented more than just genetics and genomics. We represented all the life science, and especially the agriculture. And so the names that we brought back, those are the people for the last 3 years that I've gone into the system, ADIN, and I looked to see if they actually applied to Iowa State. So like 3 years ago, I could see that 4 people that we had contact information from at SACNES had applied to Iowa State. And of those 4 people, three of them did not complete their application. 1 person did, and he was admitted. However, he was also the only white person in the group of 4. And he was from an Iowa school. But I mean, that's what we saw. Last year, I believe there was 5 people who applied to Iowa State from SACNES, and 4 of them were admitted and did come to Iowa State. And so you think, well, 1 to 4 over 3 years, that doesn't seem like a big number. But all...
No, I don't say that.
Minority students is a big
I
Three.
think it is a big number.
Three of them were underrepresented of those 4.
I mean, three is a big number for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just actually like to comment on that. I've attended SACNES a couple of times, and I also could not say enough good things about it. It's an outstanding opportunity, and I would like to see Iowa State have a larger presence there. I know that the IG program, BCB, and math have been present, but Craig, I think that the graduate college, many universities have huge booths, and every institute of the NSF is there. And I think that Iowa State should have a larger presence from the graduate college, from other departments, from other graduate programs. It's an amazing opportunity, and the students notice who has a big presence there. So I'm urging you to make that a priority.
The thing is that we don't have to, each one has its own booth, right? We can have a little larger than normal booth and have enough people that we can do all the things at the same time, right? We can participate in poster judging, we can have somebody at the booth, we can have somebody going to the other opportunities. If we have a little bit more money, we can also, coming from the different programs, if we put it all together, we can also sponsor a mini symposium, which is a scientific symposium, so it's interesting to us also, but all those things will build our presence at this type of meetings. And if everybody goes on their own, we cannot do a lot. But if we build a group and we go together, we can have a lot more impact, I think. So I don't think the investment, person-wise, time-wise, or money-wise, has to be very big, as long as we all put a little bit in it.
Other questions?
Yeah, I just have a comment. I think there was a question about strategies. I don't know if you mentioned about this. What we found is that when underrepresented students come here and have a good experience, then they go back and they're the best advocates for us. And then that helps very strongly in building a pipeline. So one thing we've done in mechanical engineering is we had an RU site. And we try to recruit heavily underrepresented groups into that RU site and at least get them in the door and make sure they have a good experience. And so that translated well with Savannah State and Georgia. So we started getting some students, because like you said, then you connect with the faculty member and administrator. Now they know that we take good care of the students there, and then they spread the word and the colleagues spread the word. So I think just getting the students here for however short a time, but showing them what the experience here can be, and hopefully it's a positive one. And I think programs like what Craig runs about mentoring and things like that help in this regard, because you have to understand the students come in with different backgrounds, different expectations, and one size absolutely does not fit all. And the faculty need to then recognize this and do their part. And then I think that can help, rather than, at least in our experience, trying to directly recruit into the grad program has not been that successful. But through the RU programs, the RU sites has been a little bit more successful. So I just want to share that. So.
I think in the interest of time, I'm going to thank Genetics. The goal is to get several ideas out there on the table today, so I'll bring the mathematics group up. Thank you very much. So while mathematics is coming up, let me at least respond. Let me respond a little bit to something that Drina said in passing. There are several programs who are working to partner with local universities and local colleges. So when I looked at the data over a couple years ago, it was clear that many of our underrepresented students were coming from state universities in Wisconsin or Minnesota or the Dakotas. So while these universities are not as diverse as some of our historically black colleges and universities or other minority serving institutions, they're regional, right? So a lot of the work that I've done and other people have done recently in the last couple of years is to try to find recruiting pathways of sort of local universities who may know about Iowa State. So do that. So with that, we now have mathematics to talk about what they've been doing, and it's Justin and Michael Young.
Yes, good afternoon. Yeah, I'm Justin Peters. I'm the Math Doge. I've been doing this for a year and a half now. My colleague Michael Young has also been working on recruiting for our department. And we have actually two programs in mathematics. We have the mathematics and applied math program, so we don't have quite the same complication as genetics that has a large variety of programs. In mathematics, the underrepresented group consists of women and, of course, of other minorities. A number of years ago, we had a low percentage of women in our program, and we have worked on this and built this up. So now about 3/8 of the graduate students in mathematics are women. This new class, the first year class of 20 graduate students contains 8 women. Of course, we've been hearing about REUs. I don't have a great deal new to say about REUs, but we've been doing this for about 10 years, and this has been successful. This has been a very good way to recruit students, in particular making contacts with certain colleges and continuing to renew these contacts by bringing in REU applicants to campus. By sending faculty there to give talks. This has been a valuable strategy for us. This has, so now when, and another thing we do is students who, that we have accepted into our program, we invite them to come to campus. And when the students that we invite here generally have a very positive experience, and with the acceptance rate among that group of students is actually quite high. And now when students come in, particularly when women come in, they see that there is a substantial number of women students in the graduate program, and they know they're not going to be isolated. And now the same thing has also happened just in the last 4 years with minorities. We have started to build up a critical mass of minority students. And it's just extremely difficult. I mean, I've been interested in this for a number of years, and it's just extremely difficult to build up a critical mass. But once you have a critical mass, then it becomes a lot easier to recruit more students, because no one wants to be the first person of their color, okay, among the graduate students. So if they can see there are other students like them in the program, it makes it much easier. One student, for example, that was recruited, or initially recruited at SACNAS, I think by my colleague, Michael Young, came to visit last spring, and then she had a conversation with me about this, and I assured her that we are interested in taking care of and retaining our students, that we really take this seriously. And I'm sure she had many other offers, but she decided to come to Iowa State. And so she was a student from Bryn Mawr College, a very well-regarded private college, and we were just delighted to get her. Well, let me turn this over to Michael, and he can talk about what he's been doing.
So I, for the last 4 years, have been doing a lot of recruiting for the department. I hope I can tell you something new. I think genetics stole my game plan. So I think some of the important things to me are, so the thing I have at the top of my list is to look at other universities and what basically know the competition, right? So there are a lot of math departments that do very well with underrepresented students and have high applicants and high retention rate. And so I spend a lot of time looking at what they're doing and what they're offering and how they're recruiting the students. So actually in mathematics, we have an alliance that started with the University of Iowa, Iowa State, and UNI that's now gone national with somewhere between 80 and 100 universities involved. And this alliance is really nice because what happens is each university that participates, they target their underrepresented undergraduate students, and they kind of feed them into this program, in the program they facilitate the undergraduate students. They pair them with mentors from other universities, help them go through their application process, and then they have a national conference in which we attend and host a table. And so that's a good way, just by being paired as a mentor and being at the table, meeting the students has been a very good way to find students and learn about how to find students and where to find students. The minority serving undergraduate institutions, so there are quite a few black colleges and Hispanic serving colleges that I try to make contact with on a semester basis, just and go to and give talks. Like Justin said, we have quite a few faculty who go to these places and give talks, and after a while, the students become familiar. But I think the biggest reward from doing that is that the faculty at these universities become familiar with your program. And I think I get an average of 7 to 10 emails a semester from faculties at these universities saying, I have this student or these 2 students that are looking for programs to go to, and it's starting to get easier to find the students because they're actually coming to me. The conferences, so we attend the SACNUS conference also, and we also attend, so the Field of Dreams conference is the conference that the Alliance holds, and then there's 2 other underrepresented national conferences in mathematics that I attend every year. I go to all of these every year, so just like genetics was saying, the students and the faculty there now know me, they know the department, they know what we have going on here, which definitely helps with the recruiting. So there are other national conferences in math that aren't targeted at underrepresentation, but they are targeted toward undergraduates, and they do things like poster sessions for the undergraduates who have gone to REU. So I, even when I'm, at a conference for myself scientifically, I'll take time to go there to find the undergraduate students, because, I'm not going to reach all of them, so I try to get to the ones that I can when I can. So the next thing, so in my opinion, the biggest recruiter to any graduate program for minorities is retention. Okay, so I have these faculty contacts at all these universities, but the biggest thing that makes them email me about their students is because they know what will happen to their students once they get here. There's no uncertainty that they're going to get here and they may be out on the street in the next year or 2. So so I think focusing on I think retention and recruiting are the same thing. And so so I started a group here called MOCA, the Mathematician of Color Alliance, within our department. And so it is, the concept is we have all of these students who are, so most of our underrepresented students are from the South, Puerto Rico, Mexico, and as Genetics said, it's culturally different here. I think the location is by far the biggest deterrent for recruiting these students. So the idea of MOCA is to kind of, you know, make the students forget where they physically are, like what state they're physically in, right? So we have this group. I mean, because I know I went through this as a graduate student. When I left home and went away to graduate school, there was no one in the school or the department who was like me, and so it was very hard for me to find a place to go to be myself and complain about all the people that weren't like me. And so, I mean, they don't complain about you. They all love you. But it's it's a time where the students know that if you're in the program and you're by yourself and you want to complain, you complain to the people who are at home, and all they say is, well, we don't know what it's like, so you should come back home. And so now the students don't have that. They have others that may be going through the same thing that they're going to. And another thing that MOCA does is the students, I get the students heavily involved with the recruiting process. So I forget his name, but one of the genetics people said taking the students to the conferences to do the recruiting, that is, they're invaluable in that regards. I mean, one, it lets the other students know that they won't be the only ones, and that I'm not making it up when I say that, you know, we have 7 or 8 Black and Hispanic students in our department, and, you know, they can, you know, talk to them directly about those things. And also the faculty at the other universities know I'm not making these things up as well. They can see the students, they can talk to the students, and things like that. So there, I mean, and MOCA does other, I've gotten them involved with the undergraduates here on campus. A couple of semesters ago, they ran a GRE workshop with things like that. They've done community organizing events. So, but that's been, I think, our biggest recruiter, because the other students come in and they visit and they see that there's already a community. And, you know, as Justin said, it's very difficult to start this, but now that we have them, it's like buying a house. It's easy to get the house. It's very difficult to maintain it, right? You have to take care of it if you want it to take care of you. So I think I'll
take questions. Questions for either Justin or Michael.
I was wondering about MOCA and whether there may be, one of the questions that came up at my lunch table was, wow, I had a couple of students, minority students, and I was trying to really, you know, get them in touch with study groups, especially minority study groups and that sort of thing on campus. So is there, does MOCA collaborate with other minority undergraduate or graduate student organizations, or is there a central place where if a faculty member has a student that they think, you know, could use a community, is there a place where faculty who are out of it can learn about this?
the answer is I don't know
Okay.
exactly
So,
where.
so the Black Graduate Student Association and the Latina Graduate Student Association are both very active at the moment.
What about undergrad?
There is similar. There are various student organizations that are active. I don't think they're necessarily structured in a discipline-focused way, and I think our Black Graduate Student Association and Latina Graduate Student Association also aren't structured there across the university. They're Penn University. But if you're, that would be the first point of call.
You could also check with Derek. I think for the Inspire LSAMP on campus, Derek has tried to reach out to the student organizations, and I think even offered to talk with them. So I think he may even have a short list and have. We're trying to also use that to reach out to some of the undergrad students.
And centrally, Thelma Harding in the back, and I run a mentoring program for all incoming graduate students of color. So ideally, what Michael described in MOCA is great, and I don't try to replace that, but if there is a student coming in and he or she is in a program that doesn't have such infrastructure, then we can provide a mentoring connection for that student when they first arrive on campus.
So for new faculty who come in, they should go to the grad college site?
Yeah, there's a grad college website that has all these resources linked under, both linked from diversity, but also linked from admission and retention of graduate students. Okay, I think let me thank mathematics, and it's a perfect segue that Michael provided to me, because then we're going to turn a little bit to retention, and I think we've got biochemistry, biophysics up first. We're running a little bit tight on time, so while they're setting up, we've got about 10 graduate learning communities on campus that are in programs and with the main goal of helping retain graduate students and helping them transition from undergraduate life to graduate work.
Right. So Ruben Peters from biochemistry, and I was the Doge for a long time, and I more or less have been asked here to talk about the learning community that we started for our department. And this really actually, though, grew out directly of the NSF requirement for outreach, because one of the things I noticed in teaching my regular general biochemistry course was that we had a lot of graduate students who took this senior level biochemistry course, and as an issue of retention, a number of them from historically black or historically minority serving universities were showing up in this class and failing, frankly. So I knew there were issues with this. And when talking to some of them, it became clear that some of them were isolated. They didn't have ideas of how to study effectively, I suppose would be one way of looking at it. And so I wanted to start a general learning community at the graduate level across the biological sciences, because many of these graduate programs require their students to take that course that I was teaching. NSF did not fund that grant, but in the meantime, we decided to go ahead at the department level, since I was Doge and had control of that and had a little bit of support, to start a graduate level learning community just within the department, which has a separate general biochemistry course at a higher level. And so, honestly, because I was out of the country, I was doing a semi-sabbatical at the time, I will let Quinn, who was a graduate student, one of the two graduate students who helped start the community and really got it rolling while I was gone that first semester, talk about that process.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Quinn. I'm a third-year PhD student in biochemistry. And as Dr. Peters said, one of the graduate students that kind of helped get this learning community going. And it all started when I was walking in the building and Dr. Peters was walking out, and he's like, "Hey, Quinn, I've got this idea for a graduate learning community. You want to be a peer mentor?" And I was like, "Okay, sure. I like talking to people, so I'll do it." So then we had to figure out, what do you even do with a graduate learning community? And so the other student I started this with, Sani, she and I both tried to ask around our department and find out, what do students not know? What do we need? What's a need that's not being filled? And we kind of based this graduate community around this common struggle of none of us knew what to do after graduation. So our focus is on career and professional development, and we framed all of this around something called an individual development plan, which is a self-report survey that it's STEM focused. It's something produced by AAAS. And what students do is they report there's a 5-point Likert scale where they talk about certain areas of their skills, interests, and values, And then at the end, they get like a percent match for certain careers within STEM. So this is everything from research intensive to teaching intensive careers, all the way to things like technical writing or even patent law or patent work type stuff. And then really we've tried to keep the graduate learning community focused on the community. So we did a lot of data collecting. We asked students, okay, within this area of career development, what do you want to know? What are you interested in? So we had everyone fill out the IDP, look at the results. We talked about the results. And last year was our inaugural year, and we had like, for our first IDP meeting, like 75% student turnout within our departmental major, which I think is pretty good. No, of all of the students in our department, at our first IDP meeting, we had like 75% of the departmental major students show up. Because, I mean, there was no graduate learning community before last year, so we had students from all years show up. This year, it was just our first class. So I could talk a lot about, like, what we do in terms of like how do we focus on career development, but I'd rather talk about like this aspect of community. And really, I think in terms of retention, like as a graduate student, grad school is hard. It's really stressful, and a lot of times you feel like the only person in the world that's freaking out about the things you freak out about. So a lot of our events there's always this focus on a topic, but they all involve lunch, and there's always like 10, 15 minutes of just catching up, figuring out what's going on with people, and really just helping people build that sense of community so that, you know, it doesn't feel like you're going through grad school by yourself. And something we did this year to try to help like bring the first year class into the fold is before the semester started, we had like a social cookout where a lot of our current students brought, we had a cookout at a faculty member's house, and all of the first years showed up, and a lot of our second, third, and fourth years showed up also. And then at the end of the year, we have like this closing lunch where we talk about how did your year go, what were your biggest struggles, what kinds of advice do you have, and most importantly, what do you need from the graduate learning community next year? What can we do to help you make your experience more meaningful? And that's about it.
So one thing I'll point out is that in line with the NSF requirements that we document everything that we're doing and how effective it is, that I simply went in. My idea for what I was doing as the outreach was a broader program. It involves some of what Quinn had talked about in terms of career development and proposing the idea that through forming graduate learning communities, these students have a peer network that as they mature through their career will lead to a professional network. But also this idea of retention, particularly of the minorities, and going to the registrar's office, frankly, and saying, okay, give me the data. How many graduate students take this course that I was teaching? How many of those graduate students failed? How many of them were decided to come back and take it again, which many of them did, since we typically have support mechanisms in place for that. But just finding ways in which we can use the data that's relatively readily available to support the idea that, yeah, it would be useful. We have a higher rate of failure for minority graduate students than overall graduate student population, and that by providing this sort of support mechanism, hopefully we can increase that, and that's the the end point that they want to see us hit at the end of the grant cycle. So just wanted to point out that aspect of the quantification of it, I guess.
Questions? Okay, I thought if I did a long enough wait time, I would get at least one question.
I think this is a great idea, and I know that there's a sort of similar, but not exactly the same kind of organization in the BCB graduate program, and then IG has a club. So have you guys shared any of your activities with other graduate student organizations? Or are you considering doing that?
I can respond to that. So we have a meeting once or twice a semester where a large group of the graduate communities get together and we talk about what we're doing, what's worked, what are we struggling with. And actually the BCB group, and I forget their name, but they send representatives to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Graduate College sponsors those. I should say the Graduate College and CELT, our partners, both sponsor those workshops, those meetings of the graduate community leaders.
That's just to those that already have graduate learning communities, though.
Right.
In a broader
And-
sense, no, we have not yet, but we
and
hope to.
I provide some seed funding. So if you're interested in starting a graduate learning community, there's an annual call for new graduate learning communities, and I encourage you to apply.
Yeah, and ME received one of that and got that going. So mechanical engineering did. So it's a very good program, and I appreciate the input that was provided. I had one particular question. I know in our learning community, the students would like to see more faculty involvement, and that's a challenge. I don't know if that's a challenge in your case, or if it was surmounted in a particular way, or no, it wasn't a challenge at all. Maybe it's just us.
I'll answer that because I think he may not say it, but many of them are not interested in being us, right? They're interested in hearing from other people who do other things. So the faculty community or the faculty involvement in the graduate learning community is largely me. We did have a panel where other faculty showed up, and they wanted to hear a little bit about that, but a lot of the other things where they wanted to hear from people who were in patent law, who were in...
Okay, so I don't think I was referring to the graduate students wanting to become faculty. That's not what I meant. I think my sense was that they would like a little bit more faculty involvement and things like giving them feedback on how, so one of the things they do is have students come and do presentations as a preparation for conferences, whatever it is. Have some faculty come and give some feedback saying what's going well. They do get peer evaluations, but that's an example of what I was talking about, to get to know. Because in our case, we have about 40 faculty, and our research is very diverse, and so that was what they were alluding to, I guess. But so that was the context.
I can kind of respond to that too. We do, so one of the big factors of this IDP is that you have an open discussion with your mentor. And we try to encourage that. A lot of what we've done in our graduate community, learning community right now hasn't really required a lot of faculty involvement. But we are hoping to expand what we do. And as we expand, hopefully faculty will get involved. But we also are very concerned with faculty support. So we get a lot of feedback from the faculty in our department on what they think about the program, and thus far it's been pretty overwhelmingly positive.
All right. Well, let me thank the biochemistry, biophysics group, and bring up our last group of this rotating panel. As an experiment, we've got the School of Education. Oh yes, we have to thank. Yes. Thank you, Diane. And we have a second example of a graduate learning community from the School of Education. And Anne Fagan and Alyssa Storr are going to describe what you do.
Hello, everyone. Bear with us because you're the after lunch crowd, so we'll try and have our bells and whistles. My name's Alyssa Storr. I'm a doctoral candidate, excuse me, in the School of Ed. I graduate in under 200 days. And what I wanted to talk about was I am one of the co-founders of the School of Ed doctoral learning community. Myself, along with Melissa Rams, another PhD candidate, met with Dr. Fagan through other organizations and wanted to close the gap of students feeling disconnected, because as you all know, the School of Ed went through a humongous transition, going to the School of Ed, trying to find our voice, trying to find place, space, whatever. And so we felt that it was a good idea, with the support of Dr. Fagan, to start a learning community to help students find professional development opportunities, to make them feel like their concerns were warranted. We were listening to their concerns. We wanted them to be successful, help them be successful in whatever program they were in, whether it was curriculum and instruction, ELPS, what have you. And so we decided to apply for the funding that Dr. Ogilvie was talking about. We're successful in that and started a doctoral learning community. So what we had done our first year was a lot of panels with faculty members, vita writing, work-life balance, which is huge, because we do have, in particular programs within the School of Ed, we do have a lot of non-traditional students or professionals that work during the day and then take night classes. Or we have single-parent families, single parents that are trying to finish their PhD or their master's program. And so trying to fill the needs that were brought to our attention through surveys that we did, sort of a pre and post survey, seeing what the students wanted, and then at the end of the semester or the year, how we did, what we could have done differently, other topics that we could have for our monthly meetings. And so it's been a really positive experience. And I know Dr. Fagan will touch on some of this, but this second year we have started to tape the programs or the panels, so students that can't make it to campus or are distance learners can watch the panels so they feel like they are part of a community. We really felt that, through no one's fault, that there was a lack of community around students within the School of Ed just because of the huge transition and just trying to find where everybody fit. And so I really have felt, seeing the success of our learning community, we really have gotten back to that sense of community. I am involved in a doctoral writing group called SWAG with some of my colleagues, and that has been extremely successful. A variety of students, both non-traditional, students of color, other students, in all phases of their dissertation timeline, and that has been extremely successful. We've had students wanting more information about program milestones, when they're supposed to submit what paperwork. That has been extremely helpful. Dr. Fagan's done a wonderful job of keeping us abreast of what needs to be done. So when you're working full-time and then coming to night class, you don't have time to talk to anyone about what you're supposed to be doing. You have your major professor, but if they're on campus during the day, you really don't have a chance to meet them unless you're in class with them. And so really trying to be as transparent as possible about the process, about all of the ins and outs of the transition, I think has been extremely successful. And because Dr. Fagan has been very good with following up with students, making sure that they don't fall through the cracks, I think is what has made our learning community extremely successful. Numbers are small, but it depends on the program. And the people that do come, yes, we have food because we all know graduate students, a lot of us can't afford a lot. So we're thankful that there is food available for students. We meet before night classes start. So if people have time, they can come to the meeting and then go to class. So we try and be as accommodating as possible to as many students as possible to make sure that they know that they're wanted, that they have a voice within the School of Ed, and with all of the new faculty that we have hired and are hiring, they have been extremely welcoming and coming to our panels about new faculty. We just did an alumni panel just last week, all through video chat about that transition. And so I think it's been extremely helpful. And I've gotten a lot of great positive feedback from students from all walks of life about having the doctoral learning community and how that has filled a void in the School of Ed. So I'll give it to Dr. Fagan.
I have just a couple things that I would add because I think Alyssa gave a really comprehensive view. One of the things that we did last year that I think was very helpful was we did an initial survey of our doctoral students and asked them, what do you need? What do you want? What would be helpful to you? So rather than us trying to guess or impose our mindset, we drew from them, and in large part, they were looking for many of the same kinds of social sense of belonging things that Brian Burt talked about during the lunch presentation. And then we did a post-survey as well at the end of the year. So I think drawing from students' interests has been very helpful. We also have benefited tremendously from the university's license with Zoom, which is what we're using for video conferencing because it's very high quality. It allows students to connect remotely, and it allows us to record and then post those sessions on our Blackboard site. So those are the highlights. I know we're running sort of behind schedule, so we are happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, but I negotiated with Kristen that we can take a few minutes of her time, so.
I think one thing that I wanted to bring up also and to emphasize again, we talk about a lot about retention, and that is huge because we can bring all of these students to campus, but if we don't help them become successful, we're setting them up to fail and they're going to leave within 1 to 2 years. And so these learning communities are extremely an important way to help students feel comfortable being here and helping them be successful. So, you know, when Dr. Ogilvie says he has seed money, believe him, he does. So apply for these learning communities. They're extremely helpful. And that's one of the reasons that students will stay here is because of that sense of belonging.
Hi, could you explain just slightly what's the difference between a graduate student club that is department specific and a graduate student learning community?
So I'm sure there's a continuum. As first envisioned, the graduate learning community was focused on mainly the first year, so the transition from undergraduate to graduate level responsibility. A graduate student club typically is something which is across all years. They have a constitution and elected officers via the student board here. What's turned out in many ways is the graduate learning communities are starting to go more across multiple years. So I don't want to really draw a huge distinction.
Well, you're providing funding to
Yeah, I'm not providing funding to clubs, right? Because they come via the GPSS route of funding and things like that. So.
Other questions?
If you ever need any help, come find us, Dr. Fagan or myself. We're on the School of Ed webpage, and we're more than willing to help you plan programs. We can talk to you about starting up a learning community. Again, it's been extremely successful, and I'll certainly miss it when I'm done in under 200 days. So.
Okay. Well, let's thank the School of Education, both Anne and Alyssa. And let me wrap up. So I'll get a list of participants from SP at ISU, and I will forward you the links and the locations where you can find all the resources that Graduate College provides for both recruiting. We help fund trips to some of these conferences. We also have partnerships already in place at some of the universities, so you don't have to go in cold. We can help facilitate all those. And the other thing I'd like to offer in closing is that if your program would like to have a discussion with Thelma and myself about recruiting or retaining students of color, I'm available, right? So contact me and we'll have a discussion about your own particular programs, goals, and needs. And with that, I'd like to thank the whole panel once more and hand it over to Kristen. Right.
Thanks, Craig. We will let Kristen Constant get set up. While she does that, feel free to grab a coffee, although as we know, Kristen, she'll provide all the energy you don't even need a cup of coffee for this session. But we did promise some, what was it, Mac? Fabulous prizes. I think that's what it was for those who submitted answers to the trivia questions. So.
Anybody else want to submit an answer? Because right now
What was the question?
There's the guy that was sitting next to me. Anybody else? You don't have to be present to win. No? All right. We will quickly, I'm just going to draw. The questions were the questions on your tables if you weren't here this morning. The answer to question number 1, there's actually multiple answers. There are quite a few STEM departments that only have one female graduate student, such as EEOB, entomology, ones of those.
No, that's not fair, because that's the EEOB department of the EEB program.
So for this particular one, we had originally stated the question as department because the institutional research page says department in the column. When you actually dig a little deeper, what's listed in that data set are programs. And so some of the programs they list as having one female graduate student. Some of them are the interdepartmental or I mean, we'll show you the data, but it is a little, this question, you know, there's going to be different right answers depending on if you were looking at it as a department or an interdepartmental program or a program. Probably the right answer is entomology for the department, but there were others, and they were listed as having 3. But yeah, since this was kind of a Rachel. Okay. Next question.
The next question was that we kind of changed because the information changed in the 1 week since we developed the question and then went back to look for the answer. So it was, how has the Hispanic or Latino enrollment at ISU changed over the last 5 years? And the answer is really that it has increased each year over the last 5 years by a small percentage, which I think everybody who answered this got right. You don't count. You already got one. You don't get more than one.
Was that written in the rules?
It was. Alicio De Leon? He's not here. We'll get it to him. We'll find him. That's what I have an undergrad student for.
He's in my office.
All right. Now the third one actually had a right answer that we found very easily. What percentage of students enrolled in all Iowa State public K-12 schools are classified as racial or ethnic minorities? And I know we had one right answer.
This was from the Iowa Department of Education
Website. And Megan O'Donnell found the right answer at 20.2%. So we will get this to her in the library. All right, and the last question, which was a tricky question, which again, I don't think anybody actually got right. What is the Iowa State's ranking among engineering schools in the nation based on number of engineering bachelor's degrees awarded to women? The answer is 23rd. Everybody said 15th, which we are 15th in all engineering bachelor's degrees, but 23rd to women. So, we'll just draw one. Rachel, you are just a lucky duck. And so's Megan. Ada Lesham. Is she still here? No? We'll get that to Ada then. Thank you. I know.
Now I'd like to proceed with Kristen Constant, who is Chair and Professor of Material Science and Engineering, and give a little introduction about how you got into this.
Sure, and in fact, we have such a nice group here. I'd like to make this much more of a conversation than maybe the formal presentation would indicate. So if you have questions, please feel free. Do you want me to use the mic because it's being taped? That's right. Otherwise, I hate mics. Okay. All right. So what I wanted to do first is kind of give you a background on why I'm here, and so that was a perfect lead-in. A little bit about my personal history and what gives me any sort of credentials for talking to you about this today. First of all, I really have very few formal credentials, but maybe a whole lot of informal credentials. So certainly my personal history of experience has led me to think quite a bit about diversity and inclusion. I have to say, for the first maybe 15 years of my faculty position, it was something that I tried specifically not to think about. And this isn't uncommon at all. I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I was doing, and my sort of overblown sense of personal responsibility said that most of the challenges that I faced were clearly because of my choices, my decisions, and so on. And it really was not until I went to a workshop in Florida, actually, and it was a workshop for women in engineering. It was a WELI, Women in Engineering Leadership Institute, and I met my twins from around the country, people that were having very, very similar experiences to me in very diverse schools, very different circumstances, yet their experiences were the same, which led me to question whether some of the experiences that I had were actually systemic and not necessarily related to my personal characteristics. So I started thinking a little harder about what it meant to be underrepresented as a faculty member, and actually had already thought a little bit about that from the perspective of my students. Although I have to say, when I was a student, I didn't think that much about it, despite the fact being that I was the only woman in my department for my time. Actually, there were a couple of others that came after me, but spent some time as the only woman in my department as a student, and was the only woman in my department as a faculty for 15 years. So anyway, so my personal history got me thinking about this a little bit, and I actually brought it into my my classroom a little bit. Certainly, I couldn't help being who I am as a role model in the classroom, as underrepresented person in engineering, that being a woman. But then also in the classroom, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, I talked quite a bit early on because I became interested in different learning styles and what it meant to be a diverse learner. This was way back in the early 90s, and it was just sort of a new thought at that time. And so I talked a little bit to my students and actually had them do some surveys to try to learn a little bit more about how they learn. In other words, reflect on their position in the classroom and how it impacted their experience. So anyway, I became, when ISU was awarded the NSF Advance Grant, I became the advanced professor for our department, which was material science and engineering. And that person really was somebody that worked with the people on the grant that were doing the research side of the work in terms of examining what the factors are that influence recruitment, retention, and advancement of women faculty in STEM fields. And so I was the embedded change agent within the department that looked at ways to evaluate the departmental culture and how to improve it for women faculty. So I did that for a while. Then I became the College of Engineering Equity Advisor, which was again another position within that advanced grant, which was sort of the college level person that did what I was talking about at the departmental level. And that position actually persisted even after the grant finished. And so with that, I looked a lot at searches and other ways that might influence the demographics, other things that might influence the demographics of our faculty, whether it was persistence, the culture, searches, and so on. So again, really still focusing on faculty. I was also a member of the College of Engineering Diversity Committee. We thought more broadly. Again, my previous experience had been more on faculty, and this had a student component as well, and was part of the Diversity Symposium, which we had a series for 3 or 4 years there, and I think we're going to try to bring that back. Also been through a number of trainings related to diversity, including Safe Zone training, and looking at all different components of diversity. And strangely enough, the more things I learned about diversity
whether it was with women, underrepresented minorities, LGBT community, the more I realized so many of the things that I had to think about to understand it were the same. So despite the fact that it is diversity, there were so many of the things that were the same that I started thinking of it much more holistically. Had a few other positions. I was the program chair for a number of years for the Women in Engineering Division of ASEE, so there's my education component there. ASEE is the American Society of Engineering Education. And then very recently I have been named to the ABET Board of Directors representing WEPAN, and I'll describe what that is in a minute. ABET is the accreditation board for engineering. And this is a really, really exciting thing for me because I have watched the evolution of the way we're thinking about accreditation, from thinking almost exclusively about what we teach, the nuts and bolts of the content in the classroom, to how we teach, okay, what are the outcomes, how we engage people. And then finally, I think we're at the point where we can engage in some serious conversation about who we're teaching, who we're including in education. And of course, ABET is specifically related to engineering, and I realize very few of you are engineers out there as I look around, but that's okay. I think there's some things that we can talk about that goes across discipline. So WEPAN is actually Women in Engineering Proactive Network, and so that's the representative society that I am representing on this board of directors. Actually, I think Karen was 14. I mistyped there. But anyway, we as a university are a university partner to WEPAN, and we've actually had some leadership in our organization or in the university in that organization. So there's kind of a little bit of a background on why I can be here, perhaps, but then why am I here today? Specifically to talk to you about a new project that I'm involved in, but a little more broadly about how this could impact broader impacts components of various efforts that you might be involved in. So I'm involved in a new project, and I'll talk about it in a minute, called EIT, which is Engineering Inclusive Teaching. And it's basically a project to help train faculty, and I'll get to it in a minute, to develop more inclusive classrooms. Generally, why I'm here is really to talk to you about my commitment to enhancing participation in the engineering classroom and maybe share some knowledge and enthusiasm I have about this. And really, I should be much more inclusive about this, if you'll pardon the pun, and really it's all classrooms. And the STEM classroom is a specific beast, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But what I wanted to do first is talk about some key concepts, and the reason I want to do this is because it was a real epiphany for me to my level of understanding of diversity issues. There were some key concepts that made a big difference for me, and I'll share those. You may have already said, oh yeah, I understand that. But I'll go ahead and share them with you and also comment that really, if you're including diversity as a broader impact and impacting diversity, you need to do two things. You need to convince the reviewers or the people that you're speaking with that you believe of the intrinsic value of what you're proposing. And that's true of the science you do too, right? Whatever it is you're proposing, you have to get them to believe that you feel you can make some progress in this area and it's important. So that's the first thing. But also, you need to be conversant in the language. If it sounds shallow, it'll be read as shallow and it will not be reviewed positively. So a few things that I wanted to talk about. First is motivating action, and whenever I talk to groups about diversity, this is one of the things that I think we can't underestimate the value of motivating commitment and action. And so one of the things that I heard long ago that really resonated with me and made sense is the right thing to do versus doing things right. And being inclusive is both, okay? So this isn't just a matter of, it's not just a moral imperative. It's not just the right thing to do. it is also a competitive advantage and a demographic imperative. We just heard that 20% of the population at some point is Latino, right? Oh, minorities altogether. Okay. And then, so really, if you're talking about being inclusive, if we are not inclusive, then all of a sudden we have only 80% of our talent pool. And if in engineering we eliminate the women, then we're down to an even smaller, you'd say maybe 40 if we're adding those up, percent of our talent pool that we're actually including in engineering education. That just doesn't make sense. Or STEM education or any other education. So it really is a demographic imperative. But the competitive advantage thing is what's a little hard to sell. Sometimes people say, what do you mean by that? Well, there's actually quite a bit of literature these days showing how diverse groups are actually more productive. And so these are just a few of the headlines I picked out. Women in management teams improve financial performance. The case of diverse teams gets even better. This was in the is at Harvard Business Review. And it shows that teams with a higher level of diversity actually have better work products, and it measures it in all kinds of ways. There is some interesting information, too, about patents that have been developed by diverse teams are more productive in terms of being picked up and put into practice and so on. Also, the couple of other books that I found really interesting, The Differences by Scott Page, an economist that talks about the economic arguments for diversity. And then another ASR, I forgot what that is. But it's another research journal that was talking about, and it's a science review. Oh well. Anyway, and it actually gives a very compelling business case for diversity. So again, there's a lot of research out there that shows that it really is, gives you a competitive advantage. And so when you talk about this and understand that fully, I think it's a lot more powerful than if you just say, okay, diversity for diversity's sake, which for some people anyway, is much less compelling. So another key concept. A lot of my activities have been involved with underrepresentation in terms of gender, but there are also, of course, other components to underrepresentation, and it could be underrepresented minorities and others that may or may not have a visible difference. So with regard to gender, race, and ethnicity, obviously bias and discrimination varies across the field that you're in, whatever you're doing. In some cases, women are underrepresented. Some cases, minorities are underrepresented. Minorities, classic, are underrepresented. Some cases, they're not. And so it really is contextual. But there are commonalities in what we face and how we address this. There are commonalities, anyone underrepresented. And the big epiphany that I had when I read this, I said, yes, that's the essence of this. That is, when you are in a situation and you are an individual that possesses an unexpected attribute, okay, a much higher level of evidence is expected to be thought of, as competent. In other words, more evidence is required for a certain individual to possess an unexpected attribute. What does that mean? It means that if there aren't very many African American women in engineering, then if you're an African American woman, you're going to have to show much more evidence that you belong, okay? And so really that's the truth for anybody underrepresented, and it's in many different fields. So what I wanted to point out is the commonality is that strategies to overcome this are similar for all people that are in that category of whether you are expected to be participating in that activity. So many of these issues, again, are very similar for both underrepresented minorities and women. Some are not, and I don't want to trivialize one or the other. But anyway, obviously people with double minority status often have even more challenges. So finally, another key concept is diverse learners. And what I was getting at earlier when I talked about the classroom activities I used to have to try to get people to think about their learning styles. There are learning styles that are common and learning styles that are not common. And there are people with different talents that may or may not be obvious. And they may or may not align well with our usual system of education. And so, again, another key concept is diverse learners are also often in the category of people who can be better served by an inclusive classroom. And what I wanted to say too, much of the research that was done in advance and some of the other work that has been done in the classroom about understanding the impact of various strategies for improving the inclusive classroom has shown that majority learners also benefit from these strategies. So one of the things that I always bring up is a situation, and it's actually happened to me 3 times now, but the first time I had a hearing impaired student in my classroom, I had some coaching by Disability Resources, and they gave me some advice on how to manage things. And at the end of the class, I had higher teaching ratings and more students compliment me on some of the things that I did that were actually geared towards helping this hearing impaired student, but actually benefited all the students in the classroom. And that's often the case. Things that you do in the classroom to benefit disabled students often is of value to the majority as well. So, again, I've been kind of framing what I want to talk about in terms of resources, and I've already said this, but engineering, STEM, and everything else. Of course, the reason that I talk about engineering quite a bit is because of all my experience has been, a lot of my experience, not every bit of it, but it has been in engineering. But I want to also mention that every discipline has its own culture, and they're different. Every discipline has its own set of minority or people unexpected in that discipline. And so I don't want to say that everything I talk about applies equally to every discipline, but I want to try to point out some things that really tend to be valuable across disciplines. So again, underrepresentation is really defined by that unexpected attribute. If you don't expect someone who looks like that to do that, then that's what it is defined by. So let's get to the resources, which is really why I was asked to be here and telling you a little bit about what you might be able to make use of. The project that I mentioned in the very beginning was the Engineering Inclusive Teaching, which is a project that is sponsored by NSF. It's ongoing, actually. We're just in the implementation phase. We were in the planning last year. But it's actually part of WEPAN. I already introduced you to WEPAN. But they are the agency or the group that was awarded this grant from National Science Foundation. And this is the information on it, which I'm sure will be shared through the SP at ICU group. So Engineering Inclusive Teaching, as I mentioned, is a funded project. It is really all about creating an educational environment that is inclusive and promotes persistence of underrepresented students, specifically for this project in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Again, but it's very specific in our stated purpose to benefit all students in terms of persistence. By the way, and I didn't mention one particular group of underrepresented, probably it's even more underrepresented these days, but that is of the first generation college students. Sometimes that is in addition to minority status, sometimes it's not. But I'm certainly sensitive to that too, and these students have a special set of challenges. I certainly understand that. I was one of them, a first generation college student. It was a little more common back when I went to school. But again, this is something that I think can be thought of as part of the inclusion. Oh good, that's not showing my texts that are coming in. I was checking to make sure. It's only on this screen. Okay. So with regard to this particular project, As I mentioned, we're trying to create a learning environments that support persistence and success of women and other represented minorities. So what our approach is to really coach and train faculty to develop an engineering environment, a classroom environment, or a STEM classroom environment. As a faculty member, you really set the tone for the environment in your classroom. And this is actually really familiar and comfortable to me, because what I found in my work with Advance is that the culture of the department was absolutely critical to the success of faculty. And so the equivalent for a student is the culture and the feel and the experience in the classroom. That's where they spend all their time. That's where they do the heavy work of education, is in the classroom, or at least a lot of it. And so in terms of developing inclusive classrooms, this project actually has 11 partner schools, and they're all listed there. Iowa State's there with a star, which means we're also a CERTL school, Center for Integration of Learning and Research and Teaching and Learning. Yeah, there I got all the, thank you for the help. And if you don't know about that resource, that's something to look into as well. Have you talked about CERTL at all today as a resource? Oh, okay. But anyway, these are the schools that are the partner institutions for this grant, and we are basically piloting a series of webinars. And the webinars are really training faculty. And so how do you train faculty? It's sort of like a trick question. How do you train a cat? Something like that. But really, you provide them the venue, a place to get together. You give them the tools. And you hopefully make them a part of community of people that are interested and committed to a cause. And so that's our goal. We have developed a series of how-to webinars showcasing experts. Really what we're trying to do is combine the social scientists, which that's a group of people that study these kinds of things, and then the practitioners, which that should say master teachers. But anyway, the social sciences and master's teachers get together and talk about various research-based approaches to a more inclusive classroom. So there are to-do agendas and bulleted action items, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. But then there's also a community of practice. Once you participate in these webinars and you ask questions online and so on, you begin to identify people in other schools doing very similar things to what you're doing. So here's a list of the topics for the webinars, and they're not all fixed, and we're moving a few things around, but you can read through faster than I can. But there are a lot of issues associated with understanding really what it means to be underrepresented in the classroom, and what you're faced with, whether it's implicit bias or microaggressions. Has anyone heard that term? Oh, good. Okay. So I've been to a number of microaggressions discussions, and been to even more discussions that included microaggressions. But anyway, it's a very powerful thing to be able to name something in terms of understanding it and processing it and appropriately interpreting it. So that was kind of cool. One of the things that I was going to say here, implicit bias, did you mention the Harvard Implicit Bias Survey anytime today? There's a wonderful resource that is a national resource, and it's online, and it's a way to measure your own implicit bias, and it's a Harvard project. And I had my students in my professional development class do this. It's very much like a video game, so they were all right at home. You have to make really quick decisions about certain pictures you see, and classifying things and qualifying things as good or bad or this above that and so on. And it comes back, and there are a variety of parameters you're doing this little self-study or self-test on, ranging from color of skin, gender, weight, all kinds of differences that you might see in people. And it comes back with whether you have sort of you make implicit assumptions about people. Do you assume a woman is in social science and a man is in hard sciences or something like that? So it's really interesting because the students like to think that they don't have any of these biases, and it turns out they look almost exactly like the general population, despite the fact that they feel like they're different and new and not like us old people. And the truth is that we're all products of the same culture for the most part. And so, so that's a really interesting topic, and we'll get to that in a few seminars. But the CELT has been putting out announcements about these, and I've offered to host these in our conference room and watch these webinars together. They're also taped so that you can watch them on your own time as well. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to mention the webinar format. There's a presentation. It's recorded for later viewing. There are often action checklists on sort of the summarizing all the parts of the seminar that you should remember and check to see if you're doing this in your engineering classroom. There's recommended reading. There are discussion questions and handouts. When you're on the webinar live, it's interactive. You can raise your hands when they ask questions, and you can ask questions in the middle of a talk and so on, and respond to polls. And so there's a little showing that GoToWebinar screen that has all the information about that. So here's a little bit too busy, but hopefully you can see it later if you pull up this presentation. But it actually shows you the topics of each of these seminars. There's been 3 so far, and as I mentioned, they are taped. And it shows you the different resources associated with it, and then allows you to give feedback as well. One of the seminar last week was a frame for promoting equity, a framework which I thought was really very interesting and is a good way to think about diversity and inclusion. And it's sort of the evolution of how we as, well, as a group, as a people, are thinking differently about it these days. Initially, especially in the sciences, the first approach was to fix the people that don't fit in, okay? So you got to fix the women, fix the underrepresented minority. You have to give them something that they don't have in order to succeed. And that has some assumptions that are actually quite negative. In other words, you don't belong here, but we'll try to give some things to you to help you, do better. Then the next frame, and moving up is level of sophistication, is to create equal opportunity, and that is to just remove the barriers that prevent certain groups from succeeding. And then moving on, valuing difference, to really appreciate and understand that the diverse group that you're working with actually is more valuable than a homogeneous group would be. And then finally, in terms of the final step, is to really approach the culture in general. And this is actually just an example of what one of these webinars looks like and how it gets you to think about diversity and understand and perhaps have that language to discuss it in your broader impacts. So a way too busy checklist, but what I wanted to show you is the richness and the depth of what is provided after this webinar in terms of helping you understand how to apply this in your classroom. Some other resources I wanted to mention. This EIT website altogether has a very rich set of resources that has all kinds of books and papers related to inclusive teaching. And that's something, again, that may be of benefit to you when you're working up a broader impacts related to diversity. So I wanted to mention also that something that was brought to my attention by Diane, that there are certainly, this engineering inclusive teaching is something that was created specifically related to engineering, but there are a lot of other fields that have similar resources, and just a quick search around will lead to these. One that was pointed out to me by Diane was information technology resource for women in information technology, and again, another really rich, deep resource for all kinds of information on inclusive learning environments. And so you can see right there that they have specific websites on developing an inclusive learning environment for for computer science specifically, and a group of faculty sharing best practices. So these are some of the topics that I pulled off that website. And again, you can see the commonality with the engineering set that I showed you just a moment ago, unconscious bias and so on. So one of the things that I thought was interesting is when I looked at this engineering, or excuse me, this IT inclusion website, the first thing that they talked about was addressing the classroom culture. And the computer science classroom, and so I thought this was cute, especially because that's the computer I wrote my dissertation on. Yeah, probably just exactly like that. So anyway, other resources, I wanted to really emphasize CELT, and I'm sure that you've already talked about that quite a bit today. But there was actually, if you just search on it, there have been a few different CELT workshops specifically on inclusive classroom topics, and I'll get to one of those in a minute. There is another resource that I wanted to mention because I'm very proud of it. It's been something that we've worked on pretty hard, and it's called Advocacy Tips. Can't speak today, and it's probably because I've been doing it all day. It is a set of tips for majority people to be advocates for the underrepresented. And the reason that this is important and I wanted to bring up is if you're looking towards changing a culture, it makes perfect sense that the few minorities in that culture can't really change it very effectively on their own. The majority has to be engaged, and that's what these advocacy tips are about. There are also some other really valuable resources, one of which that I'm aware of, and I've worked with the people involved, is the Cornell Inclusive Classroom Strategies website, which I've also listed here. So there are a lot of people around the world, around the country, trying to do these same things, and I would encourage you to reach out to them, and that always makes a stronger proposal when you have allies and colleagues in various places. So what I wanted to say about this, the CELT resources too, again, something that I noticed when I was looking for inclusive strategies and so on, and I just, not expecting you to read all this, but there was recently a workshop in October that referenced this paper, which is talking about strategies to promote student engagement and cultivate classroom equity. And really, it really is all about inclusion in the classroom. So there was a short list, but then the list of 22 that took, I think, 16 pages altogether to discuss fully. So we're not going to do that right now. But anyway, I wanted to leave plenty of time for discussion and see if we could really have some sort of better learning with more input. So.
Can you give us some specific examples of, you mentioned a hearing disabled student, but can you give us specific examples of things that you very consciously do to make your classroom more inclusive?
Yeah, one of the things that I was horrified to find out is that studies of engineering faculty, women and men, show that eye contact with students tends to focus on white males. And I just asked myself continually, am I doing that? And the first time after I read that, I said, oh my gosh, I think I'm doing that. So again, just visually engaging people and directly asking questions of people who may or may not be making eye contact with you because those are people that are less comfortable in the classroom. Another piece of research which I found very, very interesting, and I actually presented it to my students in a class, and they had all kinds of questions. Some of them were like, wow, and others were trying to tear down the research that it couldn't be right. But it was a huge study of students in groups, and they were design groups, and it was a very comprehensive study. They were all videotaped throughout the semester. It was this absolutely huge study. I don't know how they pulled it off. And of course, it came back with results, but I didn't really imagine how extreme they would be. In presentations, the women and underrepresented minorities spoke for much less total time in presentations than their representation on the group would have suggested they should. They were more often the title page, the summary page, the literature review, and not the meat of the research or the meat of the work. And so they were often given on teams, they were given the record keeping, the convener status, and so on. So to be very deliberate about how groups are constructed and how they're coached. And I find it actually very useful in the classroom, although uncomfortable, to actually directly talk about these things and say, look, this stuff happens. Let's see if we can keep it from happening to us. And let's see if we can, and it's not your fault, it's not anybody's fault, it just happens because of the culture we live in, how we are presented with roles in the media. Remind people that it really is not a blame game, it is a how can we make this the most effective group. I also remind students and give, again, data and information that is really technical because I work with technical students about what's required in industry and what the demographics in industry look like. And yes, you will be working with people around the world, around the country, and companies are not very forgiving if you waste their resource. And what does that mean? Wasting resources is not engaging all employees effectively. And so I give that talk. But again, just inclusive practices in the classroom, it really depends on what you're after, but reminding yourself and even telling the students that you can make mistakes and we're all subject to the same pressures, and so let's try to get past those things. Students do find it very uncomfortable at first, and it's even probably harder in some ways. If I'm in an engineering classroom with 45 men, 4 women, and 1 underrepresented minority, which is not at all an atypical sort of distribution for what I see, having this conversation can be very uncomfortable for those individuals too. And I try to do what I can to say, I'm not trying to suggest that you need special help. I'm trying to suggest that we all treat each other fairly. So.
Any other questions?
This is kind of interesting to me because I've noticed in the lab I have women and men, and I'd like a tip from you actually. I often find that the women will defer to the men even if the men do not know the right answer, and they will go along with whatever that the male has said, whether even though they know that they know he's wrong. And I noticed this a little bit more. I did my thesis work on the East Coast. I notice it a little bit more here. Maybe that's just me, my bias. So do you have any tips for how I can sort of pull those, usually I call them out on it and say, listen, you know better. But is there any way I can sort of facilitate so the women sort of somehow don't always feel they need to defer to the men in the lab?
So this is one of those unearned privileges that the majority has in whatever environment, whether it's a lab environment or the classroom. Unearned privilege means if the usual authority figure looks like them, then they automatically acquire that privilege. And so that's what you're talking about. And so, again, talking about it directly from the very beginning, hey, we're going to be working in groups. Let's talk a little bit about what group dynamics look like and how the best way to get the best information from a group. And so if there is a question, to have everybody rotate and say, this is what I think the answer is, or this is the approach that I think we should take. And instead of just one person chime in and say, okay, I've got the answer, here it is, have every person required to say what they believe the answer is. But again, it's really hard because maybe that would happen and they still end up deferring. But if people sometimes will feel empowered if there's others in the group that say, oh, well, you know, Sarah is right. And I agree with her or something like that. So again, just having everybody prepare an answer instead of just having one person dominate. And that's good anytime, any group, any committee.
So somewhat related to that is I participated in the team-based learning that CELTS, the workshops they put on, and somewhat team-based learning is set up with the readiness assessment tests. There's individual and then team that starts a module in the course, and the team readiness assessment tests are. You do get scored so everybody prepares individually, brings their answers, then they talk about it as a group, but you actually are submitting your answer and it is, you know, part of your team score. And so I think in that sense that can reinforce the fact that something is at stake here. Don't let somebody else you know, if you know that the answer is wrong and you have a better answer, I think it tries to say, look, you are a team, you have the right to pool resources and come up with the right answer, so it tries to encourage that behavior to do so. I don't know whether that's going to...
It's a lab, yeah.
It's a lab, okay.
Right, in the research lab or something, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that right. Yeah. No, and I've seen it too, and it's hard, and I've actually participated in that where maybe it's in a committee and somebody proposes something that I really think is wrong, and I'll be quiet for a second and say, wait a minute, no. And, you know, in this case, I would say that there's a two-pronged approach, and in that continuum, yes, you do have to equip the minorities, you have to equip the women by at least encouraging them to be a little bolder, and but you don't want to suggest that's the only thing that, you know, if you just behave this way, everything would be okay. You actually have to coach the other people in your group too. Unfortunately, that's one of the biggest challenges in STEM fields, is that aggressive behavior is rewarded in STEM. And a lot of women are not, depending on the culture, some are really, really sort of encouraged not to be aggressive, but in our culture, it is not considered a feminine attribute. And so you end up having to make the choice to be compatible with your gender schema versus being successful. And sometimes they don't cross over at all. But yeah, I think coaching the women, but also, you know, reminding your group that everyone's opinion should be heard, and it's the only way to get the right answer. It is hard.
Okay, let's thank Krista.
Yep.
And I just want to thank all of you for your participation. I'm sure Megan wants me to remind you to complete the evaluation form if you can, to give us feedback. Again, thank you so much for participating. All of the materials will be available. Megan will email you when those are available at the SP@ISU website. We know we have some action items based on your suggestions, and we greatly appreciate the input that you've given us, and we hope that you're walking away with a few things to work on as well. So thank you.